As it turns out, every time I do a talk, I do something very, very foolish, like step on the microphone cable or something like that, and it puts me in my place right away. Can you hear me?
No.
Wowee, I'm not a loud speaker at all. You'll have to come up close. That way I get to see your face, too. This is going to be a series of talks called Exploring Rosicrucian Philosophy. And it's going to be a very simple statement of elementary Rosicrucian philosophy, primarily from part 1 of the Cosmoconception. There will be some material out of other Heindel writings and things like some of the philosophical courses, but it's just going to be simple, introductory, baby things. And it's not going to be comprehensive, nor is it going to be thorough, because what happens is I'm so tremendously slow that in order for me to be comprehensive and thorough, we would have to be here all the way until Christmas. So each talk is meant to be modular. It's going to be, you can attend one talk and decide that you don't like it and not come back for any of the rest, and that's all right. In fact, if you want to leave in the middle of a talk, that's all right too. That's a fairly frequent occurrence. The talks are going to be 2-track. That is, I recognize that there are a number of people that are new to Western spiritual philosophy, and so there will be a lot that is very introductory. But there are also a lot of people that have been with the teachings for a long time. And so I will try to put in a few deeper things, but what this means is that everybody has to be tolerant of everybody else. That if you're new and some things go by you too fast and you don't understand them, that might be because I don't speak well or because the thoughts are not clear, but it might be because some of the thoughts are going to have to sink in for a while before you feel at home with them. And for the people who have been with the philosophy for a long time, it means that you're going to have to hear a lot of repetition, things that you may have heard a dozen times before. But that's all right, too. It's good for the vital body. I have not, because it is one of the failings of my character that I am philosophically greedy. And I have not left any room for question and answer periods because I tried to get as much as I could into the talks, and I just didn't leave any room for that. So what may happen is we might just find some other time, some unofficial time, if people want to do questions and answers or just sit down and discuss. I like things like that a lot because it's live and it's interactive, and it's the most highly relevant way that the philosophy can be dealt with, because if I'm just talking, it's relevant to me, and I'm not certain that it's relevant to you. So if you want to have interactive things, I'm up for something like that at some time. Let's see. This is going to be a lot of fluff today, not very much that's deep and not very much that is really thick and rich. We won't start the real talk, for a few minutes because this is a school and it has something official about it. We do have to introduce and give qualifications and things like that. Otherwise, it just isn't fair. When it comes to spiritual thing, the only things that determine your qualifications are the way you live your life. You can't talk something that you can't live. And that's unfortunate because I'm sort of what they used to call a flash in a pan. I'm just coming through town and I'm going to be here for a few days and then I'm going to leave, and you aren't going to see me fall and do all of the things that I do in my normal life. And as a consequence, I can't, with good conscience, give my very best talks. which I normally do at home with people who see me every day and have been through all of the vicissitudes of my life. I'll try to explain exactly what I'm trying to do. About 33 years ago, just a month shy of 33 years ago, I was an atheist. And a little event came up, and it changed my life so that overnight I would believe anything or everything. And within a week's time, I went into a garage sale. It was actually in a garage in Tucson, Arizona, and I bought a copy of Simplified Scientific Astrology, Message of the Stars, and the Rosicrucian Cosmoconception. And I was hungry. You know, when you have something that changes your life and you realize that everything else that you've had for intellectual and spiritual nutrition has been starvation fare, and suddenly you find something that has substance, you get hungry for it. And so the way it was is I read the Cosmoconception in about 3 days' time, and in 2 hours' time I figured out how to cast a horoscope, and I was just filled with it. I was just utterly enthralled by it all. And I wanted to run down the streets, and I wanted to say, now I know what Homer was trying to say, or what Virgil was trying to say, or what Dante was trying to say, because it was all there. And only it was clear. And it was in terms that I could understand. And it wasn't cloaked in mythology or things like that. It was in very clear understanding. Now, this occurred at a time that I had been a senior in college, and I had gone to college taking academic philosophy courses for 12 straight months. And I read the Cosmoconception, and I was devoured by it, or it was devoured by me. It was probably mutual. And the funny thing was, I thought I knew it. I thought I understood it. I was ready to take the final exam. There is that kind of thing that there is such a thing as an intellectual illusion. That when we know things in our mind and something appears to be true to us, we think we know it. But we really don't know it until we can live it, or until we can work creatively with the elements in it. It's very much like food. We have to be able to break it down and absorb it and assimilate it and make it part of our character. Since then, I've gone through the Cosmoconception at least a dozen times from cover to cover. I have read it twice orally, including every index and table of contents in the book, because I wanted to learn how to put things into words, and I figured I could only do that by reading. And I've participated in several, at least 3 or 4 discussion groups that have read it from cover to cover and have discussed every paragraph of it. So in the course of this, and in the course of when you try to live it, you usually don't. But sometimes you do make little breakthroughs, and it seems that the more you can live, the more comes to you, and the more you can understand what the whole business is about. I'm still not ready for the final exam yet. I'm still very much of a beginner. And I realize now more than ever that the reality that the Cosmoconception points to is immense. And it is very pithy. That is, there is truth within truth within truth. And the experience of life that we have is so rich that we can't imagine all of the things we're experiencing moment by moment. And so in the course of this is how this series of talks has come about. I have, year by year, come up with more questions than answers, even though a few little answers have come. And so I have put together this series of talks. It's been offered about 2 or 3 other times, but not for a number of years. So this is a completely new version. I had to rework all the notes, so that's all. It's going to be all different. It's going to be all new to me. So beside having studied the cosmoconception and all of the teachings of Max Heindel, I have looked up and I have found almost all of the derivative sources that are mentioned and that are not mentioned, like the works of Jakob Behme or the works of Amos Komnenos, or everybody that is quoted as having been a Rosicrucian philosopher in the past incarnations of the organization or of the teaching. I've located all of those sources, everything but von Hellmann's works, which are not in print in any way that I can find, at least in English. And I've also been able to track down most of the work that has been inspired by Max Heindel. That is, a number of students and probationers have written books, Corinne Helene being among them, but quite a number of other people, and I've been able to track down most of those things. So I sort of understand the background out of which the Rosicrucian philosophy developed and what it has inspired into the future. And I think that that's necessary because we have to have an understanding of the cultural context or the philosophical context in which we live. Because we really are given philosophy sort of like pablum. It's something like a bird that pre-digests its food and gives it to you because the baby birds can't digest it yet. And to a large extent, we are very much beginners, and we have a very digested philosophy. Now, even though I have looked into all of the derivative sources of the cosmoconception and all of the things that have been inspired by it, I haven't gotten. There is a rock musician that in the mid-'80s was very popular. I don't have his name right now, but he was very much inspired by the cosmoconception. In fact, he even put the emblem on his albums. It's not a real big name like the Rolling Stones or anything like that, but somebody that had best-selling records. I haven't gotten in touch with that yet, but it's out there somewhere. Even though we've looked at derivative sources and inspired sources, none of those things are going to come into the talks. The talks are going to be taken just from the Rosicrucian cosmoconception and only that. So we're getting a little closer. Almost all the talks are introductions, and they're introductions upon introductions upon introductions, and finally something gets said somewhere along the line. The Rosicrucian cosmoconception was first published by the Rosicrucian Fellowship of Seattle, Washington in the year 1909. It was published by the Independent Book Company of Chicago, Illinois, and it was published with a printed price of $1. It was meant to be something, it's gold-lined. All of the pages have gold leafing on it. I have a first edition, but I am very much desiring a second edition. I don't care about any of the other editions, but I want a first and a second because there's something very important historically in the way that they developed. So if anybody here hears of a second edition, I'm willing to pay market price to pick it up. The book, therefore, is 87 years old. And not many people with the exception of the Bible, not many people read books that are 87 years old, especially books that purport to have a scientific basis to them. So what we're dealing with in terms of modern culture, we're dealing with something where the cultural context is not perfect in its relevancy. The content, the things that we're going to talk about, are in some ways eternally relevant. That the principles of the spiritual worlds and how they function in our inner being, those are things that are relevant and will remain relevant for a long time. But the words and the format and how it appeals to us, it's a little bit archaic. If you think about it, when the Rosicrucian cosmoconception was written, this was in the early days of Sigmund Freud. It was in the early days of Albert Einstein, and the Impressionist painters were still all active. So we're talking about relevance that's difficult to deal with. When the Rosicrucian cosmoconception was written, there was no radio. There was no television. There were no movies. And there were no computers. So the world as we see it now and as we experience it now is significantly different. Even a lot of plant species have mutated and have changed since then. So we're dealing with a very difficult situation. Physics and the biological sciences are very much different, and the social sciences weren't even in existence when the cosmoconception was published. The embarrassing thing is the cosmoconception was almost 30 years old before I was born. And I'm no spring chicken anymore. What I'm trying to get to is I read 2 newspapers usually every day, and I cycle through approximately 20 different kinds of magazines, everything from Scientific American to Cosmopolitan to the Atlantic Monthly to the Rolling Stone. I try to keep in touch with what's going on, and so if you want to hear Max Heindel verbatim, that is not possible for me. That is not possible at all because I live in this world, and so what's going to happen is these talks are going to be an interpretive statement of the recordings of the Rosicrucian order as they were interpreted and transmitted to Max Heindel, who added his own first-hand experience and his own interpretations, which he gives with great caveat, saying that this is only from his point of view, coming from someone who is not a seer or an initiate. Doesn't sound very direct, does it? It's not like walking through the woods and going on a nature walk and saying, that's a bluebird. So what we're doing is a little bit awkward. It may prove to be more direct than we might guess from that kind of introduction, because more and more as life goes on, I feel that immediate experience, immediate relevance is important. That second and third-hand sources are not valuable. Life, if you're living it, if it's real, if it's now, is something that has to be experienced in that way. And so even though we're going to be dealing with indirect approach through old books and a line of experience first and second hand. I'm going to try and make it as direct as possible. And I'm going to try and not speak authoritatively. I'm going to try to speak as the talks are called, Exploring Rosicrucian Philosophy. And so what we're going to do is explore together. And I'm taking the place of a guide, on an exploration, but that doesn't mean that necessarily that my knowledge is any better than anyone else's or anything like that. So if I start to get too authoritative, and if the talks are not talks that are a matter of let's look at this or let's investigate this, please say something. Please say you're becoming too irrelevant, or you're laying down the law, or you're pounding your fist in your hand or something like that. Please say something. I like interacting with people, and I don't want to put myself, I feel embarrassed standing at a higher level than everybody else. I have to tell you something that comes up every time I do a talk. I do a lot of talks, at least 50 to 100 talks a year. And in almost every case, I have to fight the urge to take off all of my clothes.
Feel free.
And the reason for that is the quality of the talks depends on the interaction between you and I. And in order for that to take place, there can't be any barriers. There can't be any phoniness. And psychologically, that translates to me as I'm hiding. So that's why I stand behind the music stand, because I don't like podiums, because it's like you're hiding. I want everything to be right out in the open, and I'm sure to do at least one embarrassing thing in each and every talk. There's something deep inside of me doesn't want me to get any more proud and haughty and egoistic than I already am. So I like informal things, and if there are suggestions between the talks, I would be very, very happy. What? Start talking. Okay. All right. The first talk is, I have a poetic title and I have a philosophical title for each one. The poetic title is shortened on the program. It's called The Inside Out World. And the outside in world. That's the poetic title. The more formal title is called Mysticism, Materialism, and Rosicrucian Philosophy. The whole series of talks is on the Rosicrucian cosmoconception, which also has a subtitle. It's called Mystical Christianity. And the entire talk, which today will be extremely short, is going to be about one word and its relevance to the world right now, and that is mystical. If we look at the world around us, there are two primary philosophies that are in the world. They vie and contend with each other, and in some ways they are opposite of each other. They have their origins in time and space and consciousness in different places. The former is mysticism, which has its roots deep in history. It has its spatial orientation in the Orient. And it has its consciousness inward. The second philosophy is very modern, extremely modern, only several hundred years. And it is primarily found in the Western world, in the Occident. And it has its focus of consciousness in matter, in the without. Basically stated, mysticism says that the truth is within, and that is the only source of truth. Materialism says the truth is without, and that is the only viable source of truth. In fact, the way it goes with materialism doesn't even believe in the things of mysticism, and if it does, it says that all of our understanding of spiritual worlds are a result of interactions of matter, and not that things are derived from an inner spiritual world. It's curious about each of these views in their forms as they exist in the world now are highly imperfect. It's the kind of imperfection you would expect, though, because any philosophy reflects the psychology or the state of being of its proponents, the people who write it down or the people who develop it as a way of life. And both mysticism and materialism have been developed by people who are basically insecure. And their presentations aren't all generous outpourings of benignity. There are statements that are stated, I don't know how to say it, there are a lot of folk statements. But when people are insecure, they tend to make statements much stronger than they really should. You know, like if you're not certain, I think there's an old adage, the exact wording of it I don't remember, but it has something to do with, in the vulgar sense, reformed drunks. That when somebody has first changed their way of life, they're not sure yet, so they're all the stronger about it. And both of these philosophies seem to have developed this way. This is a very curious situation because I work for, my profession is I'm a computer, I manage and administer computer systems for high energy particle physics research. And so I am with the adversary at all times. And because of the climate is changing now, it used to be that they had quotas that among the support staff they had to hire so many women and so many of different racial groups, and they took me as their token weirdo. All right. What I'd like to do for the next few minutes to introduce what we're trying to get to, and that is why the Rosicrucian philosophy exists at all. What is its place in the world, and what is it meant to do relative to the culture that we live in? And let's just look at the two worlds, the inside-out world and the outside-in world, and see how they relate to each other and what is missing in each of them. It's going to be slightly emphasized the imperfect and the negative in each of them. I have a whole table of things that I'd like to go into here, but I'm afraid that if I start scribbling things on the board, this will get egregiously long, and my handwriting is very bad, so I'll just talk, I guess, and hope that people organize. Probably most of the people here can organize better than I can. If we look at the relationship to matter, the state of matter, if we look at the way mysticism sees that, mysticism says basically that matter is illusion. In the very early roots, it's called Maya. It's called darkness. Now, there are strong and weak points about this. If you realize that there is something illusory about the nature of matter, you're much more likely to cling or to cleave to the Spirit. And in so doing, you're not likely to lose touch with the Spirit. The negative is obviously that if you consider this world, some of the early mystical groups, like the Persian mystery schools, actually considered the material world and matter evil. And boy, if you're living here your entire life, how can you really benefit and how can you really dig in if you think that all of life is an illusion and if you think that the world that you are in is evil? On the other hand, if we look at matter through the eyes of the materialist thinks that matter is the only reality. And if there are other realities, they're not sensible, they're not practical, they're not usable. Clearly, there is a reflection here that the materialist is going to get the most out of life. They're going to say you only have one life, and this is all there is. You might just as well really dig in and get the most out of it while you can. On the other hand, one of the things about the nature of matter is that it is separative, that it is divisive, and you can get into a lot of, like science does now, into a lot of little teeny tiny little corners, and you lose relevance of the big picture of the spiritual whole. So when we're looking at the reality where we are living in right now, there are positive and negative viewpoints from mysticism and materialism, but each one has its own outlook about it. If we look at how we realize matter, which is through the senses, clearly the ancient mysticism, and there are a lot of forms of it around that are very active today, say that we should eschew the senses, that we should in some ways mortify the body, maybe not hurt it, but the physical body, which is the way we interact with the world, is looked on as totally delusory. Now, on one hand, this leads to a lot of non-attachment to sensory things. It's very hard to become a sensualist if you try to not get involved with the senses. But in another way, this is, in fact, a form of sensory deprivation. And we know what happens to little babies if they don't get to develop, if they aren't touched, or if they don't get to develop vision or auditory things, that what happens is that we have someone that cannot relate to the world at all. On the other hand, materialism says the senses have been evolved and are our only touch with reality. Am I chasing people out? Is this? Oh, okay. Okay, I certainly hope I'm not boring people. If I'm bored, okay. All right. So where mysticism develops subjectivism, and by that I mean it in the classical sense, where the truth is in the subject and not in the object, because materialism does everything through the senses. Everything then is oriented to the objects of sensory experience, and materialism leads directly to objectivism. Very positive point of view. If we look at spirit, clearly both sides have a different view there. Here is where mysticism would say that in spirit is where that's the only reality there is. And to do anything but to pursue spirit and to live in the spirit would be stupid. And again, there would be a lack of appreciation of mundane life. On the other hand, all you have to do is go to the local mental institution and talk to the psychiatrists there. And if you start talking about spirit or spiritual worlds, they have in their little jargon, it says that's crazy talk. That is not real. Spirit is not real, but that is any notion of spirit is a psychological aberration, and it has nothing to do with reality at all. Clearly, the relationship to spirit is very secular, very divisive. In the full sexist statement, it is sort of every man for himself, and at best there is humanism. In the realization of spirit, there is, from the mystical side, a great development of faith, an acceptance, a surrender to something greater in life. On the other hand, if that carries all the way through everything into the material world and we accept everything, it can lead to very gross superstition. And it can lead to some very lackadaisical kinds of attitudes. Whereas the materialistic side has developed doubt and questioning and analysis. And it has led to science and self-reliance and all of the things that have come from technological achievement. On the other hand, it does lead to a kind of closed-mindedness. I'm confronted with this every day working with materialists. I work for about 10 professors and about as many associate scientists. And out of the whole 20 of them, only one of them believes in God. And it's a funny situation. But it can lead to a closed-mindedness and a negativity and a loss of a sense of purpose. If we look at the basic philosophy that comes out of this, the mystics, especially the early mystics, felt that the only thing that we can do with life, everything is a perpetual revolution, and everything is tied together with cause and consequence, and we can't even institute anything new as creative beings. The only thing we can do is escape. And mysticism, when it is pure mysticism, has led to a giant cosmic escapism. On the other hand, materialism, especially as it has come out in science, has a rather curious notion in that everything is determined by laws of nature, and if there are any changes, they're the result of random happenings, that there is no meaning, that there is no purpose, and it's sort of a, how would you say it, a very dark and negative view of life. There's not any escape except suicide, I guess, to the material point of view. Now, in the early forms of the inside-out world of mysticism, the way it has tended to work is that if spirit is everything, and if the one is all meaning, all knowing, all powerful, all purposeful, then me as a self, as an ego, must be an inhibition to universal spiritual knowledge. Therefore, in mysticism, especially in its earlier forms, the notion is that one destroys ego, that one obliterates self and gives oneself over to, how would you say it, a somewhat vague and diffusive state of spirit that is basically ineffable. On the other hand, if one takes materialism to its conclusion, the being that does the sensing, that interprets it, that appreciates it, becomes all important. And materialism has led more and more to egoism, so that each one as a separative self is the source of all truth. So the statement of materialism is then the truth is within, and that there is a great danger of subjectivism and in some ways of irresponsibility. For materialism, the statement is that the truth is without, it's all in matter, and it is objectivism. There's some kind of a depersonalization in all of this. You know, like that's what led to the kind of conception of a neutron bomb that would kill all of the people or all of the living things and would leave all the property intact. That's an interesting conception. The way it goes is that in psychological terms, the mystic is introverted, whereas the materialist is basically extroverted. Society right now, especially in the Western world, is predominantly extroverted. In fact, Carl Jung, the analyst who developed the words introvertive and extrovertive, says, yes, this is the consequence of science. It is totally extrovertive, whether that is in the character of the scientist or not. And so, the way it is, the introvert or the mystic believes that the good taste is in the individual and not in the apple pie. The mystic would say, no matter how delicious that apple pie may be, well, in the United States, we've got to talk apple pie, that no matter how delicious that apple pie may be, it will never be appreciated unless the subject has developed the ability to taste what is in that apple pie. The materialist, on the other hand, would say that the good taste is in the apple pie. And whether or not you have developed your sense of taste, the fact of the matter is that the good taste is in the apple pie. And so we have two extreme examples. And these two philosophies, if you look at the world right now, these two philosophies are still existent, and they are still manifest in their extremism. In fact, you can take there are a lot of mystical organizations that claim to be modern, but when pressed on issues, they revert right back to the ancient type of mysticism. Now, this has been a loaded presentation of the relationship of mysticism to materialism, but this is something that is, in a way, right in how nature has evolved. Because if you look at the world, and there have to be, put it in materialistic terms, there have to be environments for certain kinds of animals to live in certain places. Whereas putting it in mystical terms, there has to be a spiritual consciousness for something to develop in certain places. So if we look in the Orient, we find elephants and camels and tigers. If we look in the Western world, we find totally different animals that aren't in the Orient at all. We find bison, and we find tapirs, and we find porcupines, so that there are even different kinds of animals. If we look at even plants, in the Orient, there are apples and breadfruit and dates, and all of the opiates have developed out of the Orient. On the other hand, now you can see the temperaments go right along with this. If we look in the Occident, we find tomatoes and potatoes and cacti as foods, but all of the stimulants, like cocaine and cacao for chocolate, they're all a product of the Western world. And the temperaments of the two types are very much alike. If we look at the way culture has developed, in the Orient, everything has been rice eating and vegetarianism. Whereas in the Occident, the tendency has been toward flesh eating and coarser grains like corn. It really is true. I'm as corny as Kansas in August. The people in the Western world have the people from the Orient look at us as being crass and crude, and that we have not the cultural refinement. Even the form of dress. In the Orient, everything is like the mystical notion. The dress is loose and it's sort of wrapped on you, whereas in the West, tight clothes going as far as being armor. Armor is a Western. I haven't even checked. Yeah, I'm recording. All right. So there is more of a circularity or an acceptance in mystical cultures, whereas in Western materialistic cultures, everything is linear or rectilinear. Everything is based on the square. In the mystical cultures, everything has been oriented in service to God, and everything in the West has been oriented to service to humanity, especially number one. And we could go on with a lot of things like this, but I think you get the idea of the extremity of the two basic outlooks on life that there are. Now, it is common to human behavior that people live within the truth of something and they know it's true. So much so that they get focused in what is true that they don't understand or look to see that there might be something more. So both mystics and materialists say, we have the truth. We have the truth. And they're right. Both of them are right. There is no doubt. Anybody who's had any inward experience, there's no doubt but that mysticism is true. But if we can go so far as to change matter into energy, as we do with thermonuclear devices, it's very clear that materialism has the truth also. It's just that both views are extreme. And both views are suffering because of the extremity. The mystics have their sublimity, and materialists are in touch with sensory reality. The mystics have beautiful faith. The scientists have beautiful questioning. The mystics have a sense of the whole, and the scientists have a great sense and appreciation of fact. Can't deny fact. The mystics have a wonderful sense of worship and veneration, and the scientists have a wonderful appreciation of independence, or trying something to see that it's true. The mystics love paradox and cyclicity, and the materialists love delineation. One has a sense of belonging. One has a sense of having a place in the material world. One has a sense of humility from mysticism, and the other has a very strong sense of self-respect as an individual. The mystic has developed heart. The materialist has developed head. They need to be resolved. If you go in a circle too long, you get a sense of futility. And you get a sense, I can never escape this. It's going to be the same thing over and over again. On the other hand, if the whole world is linear and you never come back, why recycle anything? Everything is disposable. Everything is dispensable. You know, the Grand Canyon would make a wonderful landfill. You know, you have that attitude that as long as you go merrily on your way, you can go in circles all of your life, which is what happens if you are only circular, or if you have only a straight line with one point of reference, you're out on a tangent, which is where materialism leads you. The Rosicrucian philosophy was developed by great seers who saw this impasse. They saw this difficulty between the two outlooks of life and endeavored to develop a philosophy that included both vantage points of truth, looking from within and looking from without. Things have changed a lot. Even in my own short life, I can see that, you hear more arch materialists talking about spiritual things, and you see more mystical people and more peoples of the world that live by belief alone. You see them technologizing, and so there's hope. Now, the way this all developed, there's a potential danger. I want to talk to why the Rosicrucian philosophy is developed as it is developed, and that is to stem a great danger. And that danger is to revert, as we leave materialism, to revert back to mysticism as it was in the past. For quite some time now, thousands of years, we've been coming deeper and deeper into matter, and our appreciation of matter and our orientation of the meaning of life being in matter. And the consequence of this is that from a spiritual point of view, the beings that guide the evolutionary creation of which we are participants, those beings that are more creative and more creators than creatures, as we are, we're sort of in the middle, those beings have taken the adage that farmers use: make hay while the sun shines. And so while we have been coming into the material world, more and more specialization has been allowed, so that in one incarnation we learn one kind of a thing and we specialize in one way, and in the next life we specialize in another way. And because we're limited yet, we can't do everything all at one time. We're not like Leonardo, who was a scientist, an artist, a magician, a perfect physical specimen. We can't do all of those things like that. So for a long time now, we have been specializing in the outer material things because that is what is ripe. We now I'm assuming that everybody that's in this room has had some inward experience. And as a result of that inward experience, matter has become a tiresome thing for us. It isn't enough to satisfy us. We want more meaning. But there is at this time a great danger. If you drop materialism, you go back to what you knew beforehand. And there is a tendency to go back. And so the Rosicrucian philosophy has been developed so that we do not revert back to the way things were before. There is even greater purpose for this, and we'll have to talk about what the psychologists call the phenomenon of reversion. It is a phenomenon that exists in all philosophy, the Rosicrucian philosophy included. It's a general principle that runs throughout all spiritual and material philosophy, and that is that in the normal course of development, we look forward. Like little children, we want to get so that we can do this, so that we can walk, or that we can reach for this. And as our life goes, we progress and we grow up. We become better human beings. We look forward. But then sometimes the things that we are presented with become enormously hard, enormously difficult. Or sometimes we have to do something totally different. If you've been a thinker, sometimes you're put into a circumstance where you have to learn to be a feeler. In such a circumstance, there is sometimes a tendency in the soul to balk and say, I can't do this, I don't want to do this, this isn't pleasant. What happens then is the tendency to reversion. It takes all kinds of forms. One of the forms is just a simple nostalgia. Remember how good things used to be? You know, when men were men and women were women and all of that sort of thing. And in some of the more severe forms, reversion takes the form of fundamentalism. Fundamentalism, scientific studies, even done by fundamentalists, show that fundamentalism is a consequence of not being able to cope with change. And there are even deeper things than that. Sometimes individuals revert right back to childish behavior and dementia. It's a serious thing. We are meant, it's sort of like trout. Trout always face upstream because they have to swim and they have to have the oxygen moving through their gills. And you have to keep on the move. And we are meant to go forward. We are meant to progress. We are meant to develop. You know, there are emergency times. You swallow some poison, you do have to make things go backwards. You have to put the fingers down the throat, but it's always hard on the body. There are not peristaltic muscles that go back the other direction. You're causing the diaphragm to go the other way. Now, according to the Rosicrucian philosophy, this same thing occurs with large collections of humanity over a long period of time. The Rosicrucian philosophy claims that we belong to the cosmos in very intimate ways. We are organically part of the entire cosmos, such that what happens on the most distant galaxy is as important as what happens in the smallest microbe in our body. That there is a close connection of everything with everything. This connection is indicated or is found in the macrocosm. What Spirit, or what God, if you want to use that word, does in large with the big picture affects everything within the whole creation, right down to the littlest thing. This comes about with what is known as astrology, but it's a much bigger thing than horoscopes and things like that. It's a correspondence and a sensitivity to everything in our environment, large and small. One example is that because of the inclination of the moon's orbit around the Earth to the equator, the moon has a gravitational effect on the equatorial bulge. And as the moon goes north and south over the equator, it causes the Earth to twist a little. And as it twists, it's a wobble, not like a wobble of a top where the bottom part is stationary, but the whole Earth is wobbling in space because of the torque reaction to the gravitational pull of the moon on the equatorial bulge. One wobble takes 25,868 years. It's a very slow wobble. And this means that when the sun crosses the equator, it crosses a little bit earlier each year because we're wobbling opposite the direction we move around the sun. And this means that successively, the equinoctial point at the vernal equinox moves backwards through the constellations in a period of 25,868 years. That's a rough approximation. And that means each zodiacal constellation is accentuated for 2,165 years, and these are what are called the ages of Aries, the ages of Pisces, which we are in now, the age of Aquarius, and such like that. It's a very controversial thing. Astrologers have and are right now. I get on the internet and battle with astrologers about all of these things. I'm not a fighter, but I make little statements here and there. But according to the Rosicrucian philosophy, the first degree of the constellational division of Aries was reached in the year 496 A.D. That is to say, the Pisces age began in the year 496 A.D. And so you'd look for a signal event at that time, and there certainly was in the Western world. This was the Second Council of Nice, or Nice in France, called the Second Nicene Council. And at that time, everything from the age of Aries was declared heresy by the Catholic Church. And the Western world was virtually shut off by that decree. The only way that the ancient wisdom, at least the ancient Occidental wisdom, lived was in Arabia. And we owe it to Arab culture for preserving everything that we have of Aristotle and Plato and Plotinus and people like that. But at any rate, if we take that as the date of the beginning of the Aries age, where we are right now in history relative to the beginning of the Aquarian age is exactly where Greece stood at the time of Augustus Caesar. Not Julius, but Octavius Augustus Caesar. And it turns out that for every age, there are societies that rise and have their fall. And in the same way that Greek and Roman society were falling into decadence and corruption, and what was rising was the exoteric Christianity of the Pisces age, The Greeks and the Romans could not accept that. That was the next step, because the Greeks and the Romans had this enormous hubris, this pride, and to be asked to be meek and to be humble as the church was asking them to be, they couldn't take that at all. They couldn't handle it at all, and so what they did was they reverted. They reverted to Mandeanism, to Mithraism, and a lot of pre-Hellenic religions. Right now, in many ways, for many of us, the orthodox teaching of Christianity is also tired out. I think we feel about a lot of the things that happen I don't think any of us would feel very happy, or many of us would feel very fulfilled. What I'm saying, I'm not saying something bad about these places, but if we were to go down to the local Lutheran church or Congregational church, with the seeking temperaments that we have, and having had intuitive experience, we wouldn't be satisfied with those views anymore. But we have to be careful, because what is going to be asked of us as we approach the Aquarian Age is going to be another steep change, and we have to be careful of reversion. The danger of reversion is even greater right now, because we are approaching the time of, this is an authoritative statement, and I promise I won't make many of them, we are approaching the time when the material world as we know it is reaching its end. That in a few thousands of years, which is very, very brief in terms of evolution, the material world is reaching its end. And what is going to be asked of us to have perpetual waking consciousness of something that is so big that it would almost produce insanity to be exposed to that much consciousness, and we are going to be asked to step up to that. So there is a very great danger of reversion. And this is one of the reasons that the Rosicrucian philosophy has been developed, is to find a way so that we have an answer to our head, and that we have something that is satisfactory to our heart. In fact, very early in the development, if you look at the first edition of the Cosmoconception, it is called Christian Occult Science. And it has the understatement, it says, a quote from Paul, "Prove all things." The first edition was head-oriented. All of the subsequent editions have, the subtitle was not called Christian Occult Science, it was called Christian Mysticism. And the motto was established, a sane mind, a soft heart, and a sound body. I have occasionally been accused of having a soft head, but so that's what we're trying to look at, is how and why the Rosicrucian philosophy developed as it did. It is developed to reawaken in us not the consciousness totally of specifics and particulars, but to reawaken to spiritual wholes. Not to do away with anything of the past, either of ancient mysticism or of materialism, but for each of them to be reborn anew. And this is a very important point. The Rosicrucian philosophy is not a synthetic philosophy. That is, it is not eclecticism. Eclecticism tries to grab a piece here and a piece there and a piece there and put it together and make a whole. The Rosicrucian philosophy is not that, nor is it a compromise between ancient mysticism or modern materialism. But it is something where the essence and the substance of both have been taken in and have been reborn as a unified whole. So the Rosicrucian philosophy then is not a synthetic philosophy. It is not eclecticism. It is something that is unified. And that's something in these talks, everything is going to, it's going to be something that comes up again and again. All right. So I don't want to have any hidden agendas, and I don't want you to have any notions that I'm trying to pull something on you. So I will outright state some of the basic assumptions that are going to be behind what we're going to be doing for the next 2 weeks. All of the talks from here on in get to be much more thick with information and material and ideas. This one is a little bit thin. Best to start out light. We are going to assume that there are no accidents in the cosmos. There may be new creative inputs by creative free agents, but there are no accidents. Cause and consequence works perfectly. And that there are no accidents means that this applies to history as well as to evolutionary developments and the things of our little lives, our daily lives. If you haul off and hit yourself in the finger with a hammer when you're putting in a nail, that's not an accident. If you look closely enough at what you were doing, you can find something in it. So there are no accidents in history. Everything has meaning and purpose and creative intent. Everything. Some things have more meaning than others. If we were in a boat and that boat were sinking, the radio may weigh the same amount as a baby, but we wouldn't throw the baby overboard. There are some things that are more meaningful. I know there are some people going to say, but with that radio, you could have radioed for help. I don't know, but that's just a little personal aside. Putting these two things together, there are no accidents, and there is meaning in everything. There is a meaning that we are born in the Western world, and that we are born within the culture that we are born in. It is another fact that we cannot undo experience. If we had been deaf all of our life and had never heard music, we could say there is no music. But once we've heard music, we can no longer say there is no music. It may be more or less important to us, but we can't say it doesn't exist. Going a step further, because we have been born in the Western world where we have been exposed to doubt, that's the same thing as being exposed to music. We cannot deny skepticism, that our spiritual development must be within a framework that allows doubt and skepticism. Ancient people believed in God because they couldn't doubt. They didn't know that kind of skepticism. We believe in God as a spirit because we can doubt, and that all those doubts are satisfied. Therefore, all of what we're going to try to do as we examine the recreated emergence of the inside-out world and the outside-in world, we're going to try to take into account direct experience. And if at every state, even though we're reviewing very simple Rosicrucian philosophy, if I do not become experiential, if there's not something that we can try or that we can test this out within our own sphere of consciousness, please bring it up to me, because more and more every day the spiritual realities have to become part of our living, waking experience. We're becoming more and more awake. So that's basically what we're going to do. We're going to look from the experience of living in the West. We're going to look into spiritual philosophy that is both mystical and material, and that has developed with its own internal consistency, its own internal development. We're not going to graft any limbs onto another tree. We're going to look at something that develops as an organic whole in itself. And what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to test everything, and we're going to look at the two big words in all spiritual philosophy. We're going to try to look at why. Why are things as they are, or what does this mean? Basically, we're going to be like scientific investigators. We're going to ask where and how and when, but mostly we're going to ask why, and we're going to try to be practical. Even though I do have sometimes a rather abstract and, how would you say, speculative bent, more and more and more, everything we have to have a way that we can use it. That is, we have to have a way to try. Those are the two big words in spiritual philosophy. Why are things like this, and how can I try to use this? I'll try to be as clear as I can. I sometimes am a little foggy, so you'll have to yell at me or something like that. And I will try to be reverent in all things and not just get too much into a head sort of thing. And I'll try to be curious, because after all, we're exploring. We're like kids on the first walk through the woods, exploring this and trying that and turning over this to see what's there. And let's try to keep that attitude. Tomorrow, we will begin the first of a three-part series of talks on the nature of the spiritual worlds. And it'll be a bit more thick. But for now, let's close with the Rosicrucian prayer. Does everybody here know the Rosicrucian prayer? Okay. O God, increase our love for Thee, so that we may serve Thee better from day to day. Let the words of our mouths and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in Thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. We do have 10 minutes if anybody's got any questions. Yes?
What was the subtitle of the first Cosmo you mentioned?
The first Prove All Things. It was called yeah. Let's see. Oh boy, I've got it written down here. It was Christian occultism, something, Christian occult science. Yeah. I think somebody on grounds here must have a first edition. I think the editorial department must have.
The one library.
Yeah, I really want a second, because there's something extremely important.
What is the date of the second one? Is it the next year or the same year?
No, I think it was a couple of years. I don't know the exact date.
He gave them away payment for things, and I thought he had to have another.
The second edition, what I'm mostly interested in is, in the second edition, there is a rededication. And there are some very important things in the way the rededication is stated. In the first edition was dedicated to Rudolf Steiner. And Rudolf Steiner did not want any part of it, and so the second edition has a rededication, a respectful rededication. Yes?
How are you thinking about the 13 constellation of Fusco?
I didn't understand that.
What are you thinking about the Fusco constellation? 13 constellation.
Oh, you're talking, that's an astrological question?
Yes.
There are actually, if you take the physical band of the question is, for those who didn't hear it, she wanted to know my opinion about a 13-sign zodiac that had another constellation on it. Actually, if you follow star by star down the path of the sun, there are actually 14 constellations through which the sun passes every year in the stars. Beside the normal 12 that are considered zodiacal, there is a little piece of Ophiuchus that is gone through and a little piece of Orion that is gone through. I don't think it is really viable for astrological insight because I think there were zodiacs even before there were constellational patterns, because the idea of a zodiac is based on a universal principle of nature. And that universal principle of nature is that if you take balls that are of equal diameter, the most that you can get are 12 around the 13th. And all of matter, they're called close-packed structures. All of matter and all the crystal substances, everything that is a solid is a crystal. And there are 5 different types of crystalline structures, and they are all based on the 12 around the 13th. And so the 12 around the 13th is a universal principle that is built right into mathematical space. If you take dots, the most you can get in 3-dimensional space is 12 around the 13th. And I think that the 12 points of view that are indicated by the 12 signs of the zodiac relate to that 12 around the 13th, and whether there's this little patch of stars up there that is in another constellation, that I think that's somewhat irrelevant.
In the Scorpio and Sagittarius, location in the map, cosmos.
Yeah.
And the no club is the energy sexual conscience. You know?
No, I'm not understanding.
Oh.
I don't know what you want to say.
No, que la nota clave de Ofiusco, de la constelación de Ofiusco. La nota clave de Ofiusco es la energía sexual usada consciente, con conciencia.
She says that the code note of this new constellation would be the conscious use of sexual energy.
I'll pass on that. I don't have an opinion. The gentleman back there with the blue shirt on had a question. You had a question.
Yeah, I was going to ask, roughly when does the age of Pisces end and the age of Aquarius?
We can add it up. I have the number. I have a hard time remembering all the numbers. 2165. 2651.
61.
2661.
All right. I need help. I'm the only person that in my high school in the geometry class that I took, I was the only person to write a perfect theory paper but get a C because I did things like 3 times 5 equals 8. I'm terrible at that. Yes, this is the date that if you like authorities, it is a very difficult question. It's one of those things that is wide open to controversy because where the first degree of Aries is, the constellational areas overlap, such that the the east fish. No, there's a north and an east fish in Pisces, and it's actually over the Ram. And the Ram as a constellation itself, just looking at the constellation, the pictorial constellation, is less than 30 degrees, whereas Pisces is much more than 30 degrees. And when they make a sidereal zodiac, they average and make them all 30 degrees. And where it actually occurs, well, where the beginning of the zodiac is, there's no sign up there that says, "Here, you are here. This is the beginning."
But will be in Pisces throughout, going through 2000.
Yes. However, there is, like with dawn, for at least an hour before dawn, you see the light. And I think, as far as I can determine from history, 1850 was the beginning of the dawning. I don't want to go. Right now, I don't want to go into the why of it. But what? Yeah. I love it. But to be more specific, the constellation of Aries looks something like this. And the brightest star is called the Ram's forehead. I believe it's called El Hamel. The way it goes is that most of the stars have Chinese names, they have Greek names, Roman names, but the most modern are the Arabic names because the Arabs spend a lot of time cataloging them. The North Fish is somewhere up here, and the chain comes through there. And to determine where this point is in the beginning, I tend to think that it's somewhat east of Aries Gamma. Oh, I'm sorry, this is El Sharatan up here. Aries Gamma is the one that is right in here. And that is known as the star of Jeshur, which is the same as the star of Joshua, and Jeshur is the same root as the root where the name Jesus comes from. And so the blowing of the ram's horn by Joshua is part of an astrological allegory. And the arriving of Jesus by the same note happened at when the equinoctial point was at Aries Gamma, and it took until 495 for it to get to the spot where the beginning of the Aryan Age was. So it's a difficult subject because there are some things that are related to the equinoctial point passing over a fixed star versus passing over an invisible cusp or an invisible area. Like what happened in the time when the equinoctial point was going over El Sharatan was the time that you had the greatest collection of spiritual philosophers on the earth at the same time. You had, in the Orient, these were all living quotaneously. You had Confucius and Lao Tzu. They actually met each other. And you had Pythagoras and Siddhartha Gautama, who also met each other. And you had one of the last Zoroasters and David, who met each other. And they all lived in the same period of time, and they all met each other. And that was sort of like one of the heights of the Aries Age. I think Aries Beta is when all of those great people like you've ever read the Symposium by Plato, when all of the great playwrights and the philosophers were all existent at the same time. That was with one of the other major stars in the constellation of Aries when the equinoctial point went over that. Well, we have overstayed. Yes?
Who wrote the book that you were talking about, the Christian?
Max Heindel.
He wrote that.
Yes.
Was there a writer that presented this philosophy before he did, or did he originate it?
No. Yes and no. I can give you a I'll give you a wild answer. It's off the record. I'm going to turn. I'm going to breeze through something really fast. I normally take about an hour and a half to go through this. At the same time that there was the division of the sexes physically, so that we could be born alternately in male and female bodies and keep the species going, there was at the same time a division in character between children of fire and children of water. And the children of fire are those that do things by knowledge and by will and by creativity, whereas the children of water are people who do things by faith and by feeling and by belief. The former are called Freemasons. The latter are called Catholics. And the height of the former are called occultists, whereas the height of the latter are called mystics, in a different sense of the word than we've been using it today.
The mystics or the Freemasons?
The Freemasons result at their height as occultists or occultists. The children of water, who are the feelers and the faith people, they are Catholics and they result in mystics.
So children of water are mystics?
Yes, when they reach their height. The three children of Adam and Eve symbolize three different types of humanity. Abel represents the part of humanity that never fell, never had to come into the material world. Cain, who, according to the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Gnostic viewpoint, was the result of Eve and the Lucifer spirit Samael. And so if you look at the line of Cain, Tubal-Cain and Jubal-Cain, the inventors of agriculture, and all the way down to the tribe of Dan at the time of the tabernacle in the wilderness. Whereas if you follow the children of Seth, who was the result of Adam and Eve. Eve knew Adam and bore Seth. They are represented by the children of water. The attempt to unify them first came in Solomon's temple, where Solomon was the first fruits of the children of water, whereas the Hiram of Abith, who is the Kurum Abu in Egyptian, is the first fruits of the children of fire. However, it was the weakness of Hiram of Abith that he tried to eclipse the whole temple by making the molten sea. And if you're familiar with the book of Revelation, where it says the whole earth will be turned into a crystal, he tried to do that with the molten sea at the building, and that produced a jealousy with the priests of Solomon. This is going to take a little bit, and we'll get to it. And they came and they threw water into the molten sea, and it exploded. And according to the myth, Hiram of Abith dove into the molten